With UFC 235 coming up this weekend, I figured I'd run through a handful of picks that I'm making in the betting side. The last time I did one of these videos, it was for UFC on ESPN Plus #1. I ended up winning money if you would have taken all the bets that I told you to. Largely, that was based on the Great Hardy upset by Alan Crowder at 4-1. But there's some good opportunities to make money here, so I'll just go through them from bottom to top. So the first one where I'm seeing a lot of value is with Diego Sanchez at plus 194 against Mickey Gall. Now, if you think about who Mickey Gall has beaten in the past, a lot of times it's guys who don't have great grappling backgrounds. Now, Mickey, I know when he got into the UFC, he was a brown belt. I don't know if I'd imagine he's probably got his black belt by now. But fighting a guy in CM Punk who was a white belt at the time, he ran through him on the ground. He was able to knock Sage Northcutt down and then choke him out against Sage isn't the highest level grappler. And he had a recent win over George Sullivan. But in one of his most recent losses, I think in his most recent loss against Randy Brown, he fought against Randy, who was a purple belt, who took him down in the first round and the third round, he was able to remain on top and land some ground and pound. In the second round, he got swept and ended up losing that round as a result. But if you look at this fight, Diego Sanchez, longtime black belt, I'd imagine he's probably going to take this fight to the mat. I'd imagine if it doesn't go to the mat, that Diego's going to have the edge on the feet anyway. But if Diego does get on top of Mickey Gall, Diego's not going to be an easy guy to sweep. I could easily see Diego staying on top and just beating him up like he did with Craig White. So to me, this actually is a match where I think Diego Sanchez should be the favorite, not the underdog. But people look at Sanchez as a smaller guy, they look at him as an older guy. And for that reason, Gall is a big favorite here. But I think there's a real opportunity to put some money down on Sanchez and make some good money back. The next fight that I'd be putting money down on is Alejandro Perez and Cody Stamann. Alejandro Perez, some of you may not have heard of him. I actually hadn't known who he was up until his last fight, which is kind of surprising because he's been in the UFC for a while. But if you look at his record, he's fought 9 times in the UFC. He's 7-1-1. So one loss, which was kind of like a fluke submission in 23 seconds to Patrick Williams, and then a draw against Albert Morales. But outside of that, if you look at his most recent 7 fights, TKO over Scott Jorgensen, TKO over Ian Entwistle, had that draw with Albert Morales, split decision with Andre Sukumtat, defeated Yuri Alcantara, defeated Matthew Lopez, and then defeated Eddie Wineland. And as far as how he fights, he's a pretty quick guy, prefers to use his boxing, very good striker, tough to take down, tough to corner. And with Cody Stamann, Cody's got good wrestling. He's got pretty solid striking, but I think this fight's mostly going to be on the feet. And I think if it stays on the feet for the most part, that Alejandro's going to have the advantage there. So at plus 170, you're getting pretty good value on him. I wouldn't look down at Stamann too much after losing to Aljamain Sterling, but Alejandro Perez is a guy who's been impressing me a lot, and I think at plus 170 there's a lot of value for him there. I wouldn't touch the Walker-Serkunov fight because, at least from what I've seen, and I haven't seen much of Johnny Walker to be fair, to me it feels like Serkunov is a significantly better fighter from a technical standpoint. But as far as physical attributes go, I think Walker's definitely got him edged out there. Serkunov's kind of had some questionable finishes against him where it looks like his chin isn't holding up as much as you would expect for a 205er. And when the guy who hits his hard is Johnny Walker, you can see why he's the favorite. But for me, it's always tough to bet against a guy who I think is the better overall fighter from an actual skill standpoint. That's what I'd be doing here if I bet on Johnny Walker. So I'm going to leave it alone. But I can definitely see Walker winning this fight. Similar type of issue with Zabit and Jeremy in that I can see Jeremy Stephens winning this fight. I think Jeremy has a very good chance to win this fight. I think this fight should probably be closer to a toss-up, so there is value at plus 195 for him. But in the end, I'd probably pick Zabit. But it is worth noting that with Zabit, the Zabit does get hit a decent amount. Throws a lot of flashy kicks, but there are openings in the boxing, and Jeremy Stephens is very good boxing. Stephens isn't the easiest guy to take down, though he can be taken down and controlled. That's how Frankie Edgar beat him. And I'm sure a game plan that worked for Frankie Edgar may also be implemented for Zabit. Zabit's also got very good top control. So I could see this fight just being one where Zabit's like, screw it, I'm not fucking around with Jeremy Stephens on the feet. I'm just going to take him down and beat him up on the ground. And I think he'd be capable of doing that if he has to. But if this fight does stay standing, don't be surprised if Stephens catches him. Again, Stephens, the last memory that people have of Stephens is that TKO loss to, or I guess it's basically a KO loss to Jose Aldo. Came lunging in with that left hook to the body and took him down. But prior to that fight, Stephens had knocked out Josh Emmett, who was number 4 at the time. Stephens was essentially just one fight away from a title shot. And unfortunately, he ran into Aldo, who, though he's not quite his former self, he's still one of the greatest of all time to do it, and ended up falling victim to him. But Stephens, he's still one of the top guys at featherweight right now, even though he did have that loss to Aldo. A lot of the top guys are going to lose to Aldo. So I don't know that I'd view him as an underdog at plus 195, or at least to that degree. But I do see a path to victory that Zabit can take as far as taking him down and beating him up. And for that reason, I'm not quite comfortable putting any money down on Jeremy, but there is value at that price. As far as Cody Garbrandt and Pedro Munoz go, I think Garbrandt should be the favorite here. There's been a lot of action recently on Munoz, which makes me kind of skeptical as for what that's all about. Maybe there's an issue with Cody Garbrandt or an injury. One of my concerns going into this fight when it was first booked is that I didn't even think that Cody was going to make it this far. And the reason why is that Cody's had some neck and back issues, and Pedro Munoz has a nasty guillotine. So if you're going to prepare for a Pedro Munoz fight, you would have to be preparing guillotine defense. And if you have a bad back or a bad neck, preparing for guillotine defense can sometimes be very stressful on that area. So I figured he might be injured and taken out of this fight. The fact that there's a lot of action right now that is going in favor of Pedro Munoz is surprising to me. And it almost makes me wonder if there are people around him who know that there is an injury that's going on and he's fighting through it. So I'm not going to touch that fight because of the late action on it. Something suspicious about that. I think under normal circumstances, if both of them are completely healthy, Garbrandt, his wrestling background, I believe he was a high school All-American, or at least he was a All-American within the state of Ohio, or I guess a placer in the state of Ohio, which is a big deal in high school. So he probably could have wrestled D1 had he kept his grades good and stayed in school. But you would imagine that a guy with his wrestling would be able to keep Pedro from taking the fight to the mat. And it would mostly be a striking contest, even though Cody's chin has been suspect at times. He's going to win that battle more often than not. And I think with a guy like Pedro Munoz, though he is a pretty good striker, the fast hands of Cody would eventually catch up to him. So to me, under perfect circumstances, I think Garbrandt's the guy you put your money on. But because of all the action on Munoz, I'm pretty skeptical here, and I'm just going to leave it alone. Ben Askren and Robbie Lawler. This one, to me, I'm concerned with Robbie because ever since that loss to Tyron Woodley, he's been a different guy. I'll never forget the time after he beat Donald Cerrone, and there was no other contender at welterweight, and the media was pretty much just begging Robbie, like, hey, you want this title fight, right? And his response was to the effect of, no, not really. I'm just kind of looking to stay active and, just looking to fight and have fun with it. Like, for a guy like Robbie to turn down a title fight, even though it was against a guy who had previously knocked him out, it just seemed very odd to me. And he hasn't looked quite as good as he used to. Obviously, he took a ton of damage in the Conor fight. He took a ton of damage in the McDonald fight. Had a pretty bad knockout in the Tyron Woodley fight. So I don't know what he's going to look like right now. I don't know that he's ever going to be back to his former self. But his former self is the former self who beat multiple-time NCAA champion Johnny Hendricks and gave him 2 extremely tough fights. But Hendricks was at least able to kind of hang on the feet. Whereas Ben Askren, his striking really isn't all that great. A lot of the training that he's done, like even after he retired, he mentioned that he's still wrestling and he was going to train for a wrestling tournament in the Midlands, but it's not as though his striking is really all that prepared. So for him, it's kind of like if he's not able to get a guy down or hold him down, and Robbie Lawler is a very tough guy to get down, let alone hold down with his butterfly guard, there can be problems there. So I think at plus 230, there's a lot of value there for Robbie Lawler. It's a tough matchup. Ben Askren's even admitted it's a tough matchup. To me, there's a lot of value there at plus 230. I'd like to see Ben Askren win. I think he's a breath of fresh air for the division, but this is a brutal matchup for him at a plus 230. I can't say no to that bet. For the 2 title fights, where I would think there's an option for you would be the over at 1.5 for Jones and Anthony Smith. The reason being, to me, if I'm thinking how John Jones is going to approach this fight, he's fighting a guy who's extremely dangerous and extremely explosive in Anthony Smith. Smith has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but most of the time when he's finishing guys, it's with his hands or it's with strikes. So if you're John Jones and you're fighting a guy like that, your strategy is probably going to be to kind of cook the beans on him a little bit and just kind of wear him out and then finish him later. I don't think it would be in Jones's best interest to go after him right away and try to get a quick finish. So to me, I think Jones is going to dominate this fight, but I think he's also going to kind of work slowly here and not rush the finish. So I think at a round and a half at minus 141, there's some value there. And the only other bet I would make is I would do a parlay of Tyron Woodley and John Jones. The odds you can get on that parlay I believe are at right around like minus 110 or minus 112. So I'd also parlay the 2 of them. I think both of them have pretty good shots to win their fights. You could also take a bet straight up on Woodley at minus 145. I think he should be a bigger favorite than that. But I would call it the and still parlay. Just because I just can't see John Jones losing that fight. So you might as well slightly improve your odds if you're going to bet on Woodley anyway. But those would be my bets right there. So go ahead and put those bets in and